There is a roughly 7-year-long period of my life that I consider to be a fever dream. I don't have a lot of photographic evidence from those years to convince me otherwise. I just have a lot of really weird stories that are corroborated by my friends who are there with me. They were probably equally hallucinating their own experiences due to the extreme heat we faced every year, wearing historical clothing and not having a lick of air conditioning to be found. I worked simultaneously at Heritage Hill State Park, a living history museum, where we would dress up and give tours of buildings from different time periods of Green Bay's history. And I also worked and volunteered at the Brown County Historical Society, which was located down the road in the historic Hazelwood House. I gave tours at both locations almost every day of the week during the spring and summer, and then worked various educational and public programs in the off-season. I know so much about very specific things in Green Bay and Wisconsin history and have yet to find the appropriate time and space to disclose that information. Also, if you do need someone to spice up your boring get-togethers, I can get it going with a rousing round of the minister's cat. The one thing that I always managed, and I say managed, but I actually mean lovingly strong-armed by my friend Brooke, as she reminded me that I really had no choice. I was doing this, was to volunteer for the Historical Society cemetery walks. I would traipse around 3 of the oldest and relatively interesting cemeteries Green Bay has to offer on the hottest days of the summer, with a trail of guests following me like human-sized ducklings. Using a brightly colored umbrella and a flashlight to get the attention of grown-ass people will never not tickle me deeply. Standing behind the group as the reanimated decedent docent would take around 10-15 minutes detailing their life story and how it fit within the parameters of the walk's theme, I decided, what the hell, and texted my friend at the admissions table that I wanted to get in on this action in the following year. Soon enough, I joined the ranks of portrayers and embodied the passion and drive of a few remarkable women from Green Bay's history. Some of the more memorable members of our little crew were a husband and wife team that portrayed Henry and Elizabeth Baird. Now, these two are some real hella OG gang shit folks of Green Bay history. And this husband and wife team bought their own burial plot across the path from where the Bairds are buried. And part of their portrayals would be going, and if you take a look behind you, that's where I'll be sooner rather than later. And that's a real, my dad works at Nintendo moment. My claim to fame is driving home one night after a walk and seeing that some of the letters in the Titletown district sign were burnt out by Lambeau Field. So all it said in bright yellow letters was Tit Town. And I whipped a Yui so hard on Lombardi Avenue to turn around to take pictures. Forgetting that I was in full Little House on the Prairie attire. A bunch of people saw me cackling like a maniac, snapping about 800 photos on my phone while looking like I was taking a break from churning this week's batch of butter. I bring this all up to say I'm no stranger to cemeteries. I have one singular rule I follow in regards to those final resting places. I don't go after it rains because the ground is real squishy and I'm afraid of being the only person to find a sinkhole above a grave. Or the opposite happening and a bony little hand comes up and snags my ankle. Find a grave gives me a decent excuse for walking around cemeteries and finding unique names and designs on headstones. Pro tip, if you are stuck figuring out a baby name, why don't you take a stroll around a few cemeteries and start a list? You will be amazed by what you'll find. I probably have well over 500 pictures on my phone of headstones and epitaphs from all of my random adventures. And if I ever encounter an angel statue, the Doctor Who nerd that lives in me 24/7 has me take a picture of it so I can track if it moved or not. Because, y'all, I'm not about to be transported to a different time period or plane of existence by an ill-placed weeping angel, thank you very much. Hey there, I'm Megan, a freelance paranormal researcher and investigator of over 20 years, and welcome to Paranormal Potpourri, the show where we mix the ordinary with the extraordinary to uncover the strange, the mysterious, and the downright weird. The scent profile for today is lavender sachet and carnations. So let's take a deep breath and get into it. A place for everything and everything in its place. I had absolutely no idea that the gaudy, gout-having, oiled-up men carrying him on a platform, Benjamin Franklin, shot that one right off the dome. And for all of my Broadway nerds and listeners, here's my formal petition to add Benjamin Franklin to Hamilton. It's been 10 years, Lynn. It's time to jazz it up with some new faces. The quote by Franklin could quite easily sum up the creation and evolution of cemeteries throughout the last millennia. Archaeologists refer to early graves as grave fields, and that is an accurate as hell description. And by early graves, I'm talking roughly 15 to 16,000 years ago. These fields were generally located away from the main village area as to prevent any sort of sickness spreading, visits from two-legged and four-legged scavengers, and probably for the more obvious reasons, the smell. That custom was carried through a few centuries as there are laws composed in the beginnings of Western civilization that state burials are required to be placed outside city limits. So you got to put meepers and peepums out in the boonies, folks, for safekeeping. Or, if you're me, to let them stumble a little bit longer if the inevitable zombie apocalypse occurs. And because all good things must come to an end, the virulent spread of Christianity saw burials occurring in or under the structures of religious buildings. No longer are ye casted to the pit of death. Now ye must listen to Father Phil's 4-hour-long Sunday sermon for eternity. And you must suffer the sounds of the volunteer choir, learning thine hymnals. The children are bringing in thine recorders to play along. Repent ye sins now, you heathens, or forever hear the hoots and toots of the damned. Now that we got that out of the system, it's bad enough that I always feel like I have to tiptoe whenever I walk around a church, but now I got to worry about disturbing someone's eternal rest because I got to pee during mass. The whole up, down, shake hands routine gets the old body system a moving and a grooving, you feel me? Around 752 AD, a new suitable place for burials came about: churchyards. Areas of consecrated ground were designated for burials as all of the nooks and crannies in the churches were becoming chock full of crooks and grannies. I'm a poet, and I wasn't even aware of it. Should it come as any sort of shock to know that the era of human history that contained such historic events as the Black Plague was fascinated with reopening, reorganizing, and manipulating corpses and or their graves? And these are the same group of people who later on ground up and snorted so many Egyptian mummies for funsies that it practically depleted the world's collection. Think of all of the fucking cool mummies we could have nowadays. Mass graves held bodies until they were partially or completely decomposed, and the remains were exhumed and stored in ossuaries. The catacombs under Paris, I'll be honest, I'm not even sure if you can have above ground catacombs. They are a perfect example of what an ossuary looks like. Catacombs, according to my very quick Google search, are man-made underground passages used for religious purposes, particularly for burials. There. Now we both can say we learned something today. Creating the catacombs seemed like an easy enough job. You're just digging tunnels. The real meat and potatoes of the project is then transferring remains of an estimated 6 million people into those exact tunnels from graveyards all over the city, which is what happened in Paris during the 18th century. If you ever complain about your dull, boring-ass 9-to-5 corporate job, remember, you could be hauling remains around and rearranging them in a kind of cool artistic style. And you know what? Now that I bring it up, it doesn't sound actually that bad. I know the Parisian catacombs are a huge tourist destination, and I'm not knocking them until I try them. But there are hundreds of ossuaries around the world that one could visit, and the names are just as spectacular as their pictures. Skull Chapel in southwestern Poland, Dingolfing Ossuary in, you guessed it, Dingolfing, Germany, the Skull Tower of Nie in Nie, Czechia, Melnik Chapel of Bones in Melnik, Czechia, St. Leonard's Church Basement in Hythe, England, and definitely not my house. Unfortunately, sooner rather than later, churchyards became quite unsanitary and incredibly overcrowded, and a solution was needed ASAP. After a cholera epidemic swept through Britain in 1831, a need for large cemeteries outside the city of London was brought up in Parliament. Churchyards were overwhelmed from the epidemic, and there were concerns of a public health hazard from passerbyers inhaling gases that were released from the putrefying corpses, which was called the miasma theory of disease. Miasma theory is a fun concept because germ theory was not even a twinkle in its father's eye yet, but everyone knew that huffing bad smelling air could lead to sickness. So those cartoonish stink lines are just clumps of germs hovering above Pepe Le Pew. He is unfortunately a plague carrier. Moving and shifting cemeteries around wasn't just a European concept. That practice carried over into the United States. For the local listeners, if you've ever been to Captain's Walk Winery in Green Bay, then you'll be surprised to know that the foundation of that building is constructed out of headstones. And there are quite a few other buildings in the surrounding areas that have the same thing. You can go down into the basement and see headstones intermixed with the river rock that's been mortared into the walls. When the city of Green Bay was expanding, there were a few cemeteries already established, and they happened to be in prime real estate locations, so what needed to be done was done. Folks were exhumed and relocated to Woodlawn Cemetery and Alloway Catholic nearby, and the headstones were then repurposed into building supplies. Waste not, want not. And if you are wondering if Captain's Walk is haunted because of that, it definitely doesn't hurt. The concept of a designated area away from churchyards and cities allowed for several different types of cemeteries to emerge. Picture a cemetery in your head. What are the main things you expect? Is there one in particular that you tend to envision more than others? I always figured that if you've seen one cemetery, You've seen them all. Symmetrically laid out rows of headstones along either paved or gravel paths wide enough for a car to pass through, and just lots of trees, lots of hedges. But this podcast has opened up so many random doors of trivia for me, and today's venture brings us to the several different types of cemeteries one could and can encounter in your everyday life. The uses and changes of these types of cemeteries reflect the diverse cultural practices surrounding death and how our relationship with the concept has changed and adapted over the years. I highly suggest that you scroll through a Facebook page called Cemetery Arts while listening to this episode, because the photos people upload are breathtaking and they give you a really good idea of what burial sites around the world tend to look like and the similar patterns or even the techniques that are used universally. The first type of cemetery we'll dive into is what is considered an urban cemetery. These are burial grounds located inside a village, a town, or a city that are laid out in a grid-like pattern to distinguish them from any local churchyard. They developed over the years to be more landscaped, sanitary, and aesthetically pleasing. And just like the early churchyards, urban cemeteries that were heavily used became unsanitary very quickly. Corpses were usually buried in wrapped cloth. Coffins, vaults, and above-ground crypts were incredibly expensive, and they also made decomposition difficult. Vaults and crypts needed to be aired out before entering. The decomposing bodies used up so much oxygen that candles could not remain lit. The stench of decomposition, even when buried deeply, would become overwhelming for those in the surrounding areas. The bacteria and other little critters that get released during the process would enter local groundwater sources. Modern urban cemeteries face similar problems as bodies are now more commonly embalmed. Chemicals that from that process leach into the surrounding soil. You've got arsenic and formaldehyde and mercury are commonly found during soil surveys. These locations relied on the knowledge that soft parts of the body take around 25 years to decompose, and that if room was needed for additional burials, the older bones could be scooped, collected, and transferred elsewhere. There's a slight snag in that process, though, when the discovery was made that if a body is buried in moist soil, decomposition can take up to 70 years to complete. Urban cemeteries needed that cash flow from burials for the overall upkeep, so, quote, tilling up the soil for new interments allowed for an incredibly steady flow of income. Urban cemeteries have gone to the wayside somewhat and are characterized by their overgrown state and plots being reclaimed by nature. They were also renowned for multiple burials in the same plot, and it wasn't an uncommon sight to see the groundskeepers adding a fresh new layer of soil throughout the cemetery to create new burial spaces. And there are cemeteries like the Père Lachaise in Paris and Mount Auburn near Boston, Massachusetts, that are more gardens than eternal resting places. A rural or garden cemetery uses landscaping in a park-like setting with well-planned walkways that gave access to the graves and had planned layout of trees, bushes, and flowers. These types of cemeteries are usually found on the outskirts of towns and cities, since land was plentiful and fairly cheap. Dead or alive, everybody loves a damn good deal. And if they were created within city limits, walls were erected to enclose the space and give it a garden-like feel. Nice and cozy for when the zombie apocalypse happens, and now you gotta scale the walls like you're in the Spartan race. Historian Stanley French noted that the proponents of rural or garden cemeteries believed that placing distance between burial places and the acts of daily life would hopefully make death and loss feel more profound to visitors. Distance makes the heart grow fonder, and placing dearly departed meepers a few miles away will really make this year's Thanksgiving feel super stark and morose. Quote, They believe that if people spent time around the dead in beautiful natural environments, these forces would coalesce to impart the wisdom that the circle of creation and destruction is eternal. Because space was considered limited and the cost of creating the garden cemetery was quite pricey, the first inhabitants were generally the wealthier of the community. More opportunities for burials of all demographics came throughout the years. Many rural cemeteries opted to create above-ground monuments, mausoleums, and columbarias to house others. I had no idea what this was, but there are a few in, I believe Alloway has an outdoor one. A columbaria are pretty cool. And they are increasing in use due to the popularization of cremation in modern times. They are walls typically made out of brick with rectangular niches that are large enough to contain a normal-sized urn of human remains. A mixture of monumental styles, which are large ornate statues, and urban cemeteries, the headstones in a grid pattern, seem to have blended seamlessly into the rural garden landscape. Soon, cemeteries were decorated with tall obelisks, breathtaking mausoleums, and eye-catching sculptures. I went to Alloway Catholic last night, and let me tell you about a mausoleum I ran into. It was for the first ordained minister in Green Bay, Reverend Fox. And it was about 8:30, 9 o'clock last night. And walking past it, noticed that it faces west and it has this beautiful stained glass window in the back of it. Hit an angle and there was someone standing inside of it. And I dropped to my knees because my bones done liquefied and could not hold me up. And there was someone in there. Upon closer inspection, who the fuck decides to put a bust of a person inside a backlit mausoleum? I've never been more scared in a cemetery in my entire life. And I hope to God that is the last time I'm scared shitless in a cemetery. I was going to say public space, but I'm a paranormal investigator, so that's bound to happen sometimes. Anyway, rural cemeteries reflected the evolution of feelings and perceptions towards death in the 19th century. Depictions of hope and immortality started popping up instead of the doom and gloom dreariness of loss. More angels and chubby-cheeked cherubs, less "Here lies Steve, he's totes dead." Take one guess as to who went absolutely banana split crazy pants over rural gardens. It's my favorite and yours, the Victorians. Thanks once again to Queen Victoria for popularizing mourning and making it a public rather than a private event. I'd be down 2 podcast episodes if it wasn't for her not being able to get Prince Albert out of that goddamn can. The dead were memorialized and mourned rather than cast aside and forgotten about entirely, which was the usual practice prior to the 19th century. Object permanence was at an all-time low. Out of sight, out of mind was practically a health and safety issue for our ancestors. Mount Auburn Cemetery is a 72-acre property that was designed and styled after English gardens and European garden cemeteries, located roughly 4 miles west of Boston. The Massachusetts Horticultural Society kept the natural landscaping like the forests and ponds and created winding paths between them and the burial plots. Rural and garden cemeteries served another purpose besides the final resting place for loved ones. It was a recreational green space for those cooped up in the city to roam and take a moment for themselves. You heard me correctly. Cemeteries were our first parks. Can you imagine Ron Swanson being in charge of that department? By 1848, Mount Auburn recorded over 60,000 annual visitors that came to enjoy a day in nature and wander around the monuments, memorials, and landscapes. This trend of blending the living and the dead spread across the United States, and by 1865, an astonishing 70 garden cemeteries were established near major cities. These became places of recreation, gathering, and getting in touch with the peace and calmness of nature. Families would often picnic amongst the monuments, watch carriage races, enjoy some hunting and shooting, and bump elbows with fellow well-to-doers. Landscape designer Andrew Jackson Downing, in his own words, "In the absence of public gardens, rural cemeteries in a certain degree supplied their place. But does not this general interest manifested in these cemeteries prove that public gardens established in a liberal and suitable manner near our large cities would be equally successful?" Inspired by that thought, the New York legislature set aside over 700 acres of land in Manhattan in 1853 to create an urban park. The designers embraced the style of romantic English gardens and created curving paths for both pedestrian and carriage travel through the natural scenery. If it hasn't clicked into place already for you, Central Park was inspired by cemeteries. Yep, that iconic landmark came about because city officials noticed people actually enjoyed being out in nature and not in a smog and soot-filled environment. I imagine the first people to wander about the park looked a lot like those clickbait videos that circulate Facebook about rescue animals feel grass for the first time, and it's just a bunch of rich Victorians oohing and eyeing over a couple of petunias and some long weeds. We are so easily appeased and entertained by the simplest of things. The rural cemeteries to urban parks pipeline was an unstoppable beast in the 19th and 20th century, as it inevitably led to the concept and creation of suburbs. I'm going to wait here and give you a moment because I need you to gather the pieces of your blown apart mind before I continue on and reemphasize that our idyllic, uniquely American little gingerbread streets and little gingerbread houses and those little gingerbread neighborhoods originated from the layouts of cemeteries. Listen up, civil engineers and city planners. Take a walk around the next cemetery you come across and jot down some ideas. I promise you, it'll pay off in dividends. In his aptly named book, Cemeteries, Keith French compiled evidence of the evolution American cemeteries went through from small, intimate family plots to these sprawling rural parks to the modern, less welcoming, more morose, how he describes it as memorial parks. He writes, "Cemeteries operate as alternate cities, cities of the dead. The idea being that you leave behind the mercantile world outside the gates and enter into the space where you can meditate, where you can come into contact with spirituality and just concentrate." Like we uncovered in the funeral episode, those crazy Victorians were head over heels for anything that imparted some sort of deep and meaningful symbology. And especially if it dealt with death and dying, that tickled their peaches just right. I'm here to give you a crash course on cemetery symbolism. Wonder no more about the difference between draped urns, pointed hands, and flowers. Super Nerd is here for you. So let's start off easy, shall we? In my worst Jerry Seinfeld impression, is there ever a good impression of him? What's the deal with all those dang trees? Hold for laughter. There are some iconographical arboreal choices one could find in cemeteries around the world. Ironically, they're all evergreens, which means they keep their colors year-round and don't lose leaves come fall or winter. probably why they got their categorical name of evergreens. Yew trees have a deep and rich history in both pagan and Christian lore. Pagans associate yews with Hecate, the Greek goddess of death, witchcraft, and necromancy. She also carries the keys to unlock the doors to the underworld and guides souls with her torch each night to begin their journey through the underworld. It was believed that yew purified the dead as they began their journey through the underworld. In Christian practices, the heartwood of a yew tree is a reddish orange-brown color, and its outer layer, the sapwood, is a pale yellowish blue. Those colors represent the blood and body of Jesus Christ. Along with it being an evergreen, this suggests the concept of birth and resurrection. Wreaths of yew were hung on the doors of mourning families to signal that a death had occurred and a funeral would soon follow. Mourners were known to tuck sprigs of yew into the coffin and carried them in the procession to the graveyard. Yews hold more than spiritual symbology. Their physical attributes hold a deeper meaning as well. The needles, berry, and bark are poisonous to most animals and humans. These parts contain taxine, which is an alkaloid poison. A dose of around 100 grams of chopped leaves could kill a full-grown adult. Branches of the yew tree allegedly deterred ghosts and apparitions, and to a faction of superstitious monks, yew could drive away devils. You'll never find me waving a sprig of that tree during an investigation, that's for sure. What the fuck? When the hell did I put on these blinding white New Balances? And oh my God, there's a baseball hat on my head. Oh, Jesus Christ. Am I wearing golf shorts and long white socks too? The mournful tree is the cypress, and it continues to be the tree of choice in European and Muslim cemeteries, both in ancient and modern times. In Iranian culture, cypress trees are thought to come from heaven, and Zoroastrians consider the tree to be a symbol of immortality and deathlessness. Celtic Druids called it a symbol of death. The Druids would place their dead within the tree for burial as a symbol of returning the body to the plants so they would be able to live again. The appearance of a cypress tree could be described as dark and gloomy, and they look like they are able to express sorrow. Planted near graves or in the front yard of a home signaled a warning to outsiders about entering a place that, quote, was corrupted by a dead body. Probably more commonly planted in the United States, eastern red cedars are known as graveyard trees because of their ability to grow for many years, and their green needles are said to symbolize eternal life. Cedar in general is used to drive out negative energy and purify homes. In the Ozark region, a superstition surrounds red cedars. If you plant a red cedar and it grows tall enough to shade your grave, that's the day you die. Imagine you plant a fairly full-grown tree. I'd be shaking and quaking in my boots, but I'm not going to die because I have way too many favors and bargains to cash in with some people before that day ever arrives. It's also believed to bring bad luck to transplant a red cedar. Many think it could bring an early death to them or to someone in their family. Artwork on tombstones is a fairly commonplace sight in cemeteries everywhere. It made the transition from skulls and crossbones to more peaceful, thoughtful pieces that you see today. Sculptures of angels and female figures came around in the late 19th century and are interpreted as figures of consolation and stewards of the deceased, helping to ease the transition into death with a kind face. Draped urns and headstones are always an eye-catching memorial. They are kind of my favorite. And drapes were an integral part, as we learned, in the mourning process for friends and families. Custom practices of covering windows and mirrors with a black cloth to represent the veil between life and death was picked up during the Victorian era. Carved draperies serve as a long-lasting sign of mourning and grief. Nature depictions, both carved and living, have been used by mourners to decorate the resting place of loved ones for centuries. Some familiar flora are lilies, ivy, and palm fronds. Lilies symbolize the deceased purity and innocence. Ivy suggested friendship and internal embrace. Palm fronds signify victory and immortality. Occasionally, you'll find tree trunks, which indicate a life cut short and a resistance to the forces of time. Fauna found in cemeteries aren't limited to, but do include doves and lambs. These typically are found on graves of children and infant, quietly depicting eternal innocence and purity. Some memorials have epitaphs engraved on them, usually representing the person buried beneath. In memory of Edward Sware, who departed this life June 16, 1781, here lies a man which farmers loved, who always to them constant proved, dealt with freedom, just and fair, an honest miller all declare. On a cobbler's grave, death at a cobbler's door oft made a stand, but always found him on the mending hand. At length death came in very dirty weather, and ripped the sole of the upper leather. The cobbler lost his all, death gave his last, and buried in oblivion all the past. The Puritans were renowned for their doom and gloom phobia of death, with their epitaphs reading like, "As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so shall you be. So prepare for death and follow me." From 1778, let's talk of graves and worms and epitaphs. Make dust our paper, and with rainy eyes, write sorrow in the bosom of the earth. 1740, unactive in the damp and gloomy grave, beneath this stone to worms a prey, we sleep unconscious of the world and all her woes. Leave it to Benjamin Franklin to write his own, and it be a straight banger. The body of Benjamin Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, its content torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here, food for worms. But the work itself shall not be lost, for it will, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more elegant edition, revised and corrected by the author. It actually didn't occur to me while writing this episode how obsessed the Puritans are with being eaten by worms. The worms go in, the worms go out. They play pinnacle on your snout. Then, behold, the Victorians and their raging heart boners for the afterlife. Death, like an overflowing stream, sweeps us away. Our life is a dream. An empty tale, a moving flower, cut down and withered in an hour. Alas, how changed the lovely flower which bloomed and cheered our heart, fair, fleeting comfort of an hour. How soon we're called to part, from 1821. And from 1850, one by one, earth's ties are broken as we see our love decay, and the hope so fondly cherished brighten but to pass away. One by one, our hopes grow brighter as we near the shining shore, for we know across the river wait the loved ones gone before. More modern epitaphs are witty, like, "I told you I was sick," which has been called dibs by my grandpa already, or finally, "pass on a family recipe." There is an amazing picture of a headstone with a fudge recipe that makes the rounds on socials every so often. Write it down, take a screenshot, make it, tell me how it is. It'll be a part of a cookbook that's coming out in October by a woman whose entire purpose in life is to photograph, test out, and critique recipes found on headstones. Modern epitaphs are a unique way to showcase the personality of the deceased for future generations. Raised by 4 beautiful daughters with only 1 bathroom, and still there was love. I made some good deals and I made some bad deals. I really went in the hole with this one. My personal favorite, "If you can read this, you're standing on my boobs." Under this pile of stone lies that's all left of Sally Jones. Her name was Lord, it was not Jones, but Jones was used to rhyme with stones. Here lies the body of our Anna, done by death by a banana. It wasn't the fruit that laid her low, but the skin of the thing that made her go. I haven't really put a lot of thought into what I'd want engraved for an eternity to showcase for someone who's picnicking on top of me. Maybe something along the lines of, there once was a gal from Nantucket. We've covered a great deal on what happens after you get slid into that box for your eternal nap time. But what happens if you wake up? Welcome to the world of a phobia you may or may not know you had until now. Taphophobia. Taphophobia is an abnormal phobia of being buried alive as a result of being incorrectly pronounced dead. Phobias are a lot like warning labels on appliances. It had to have happened at least once to someone out there. Anatidaphobia is the irrational fear that somewhere a duck or goose is watching you. I've dealt with those feathered fucks, and I wouldn't turn my back on them, that's for damn sure. And before you get all frothy and in a tizzy, this fear originated back when medicine was mainly a guy in a dirty coat with a hacksaw leaning over you with a hand covering your nose, going, well, she ain't breathing no more, chaps, and tosses you into the pile with everybody else. And then the quote-unquote doctor goes back to butchering and or pulling teeth, whatever is up next in line, and all the while you're just laying there in a coma. Okay, that scenario is making me understand this whole thing. Several historical figures explicitly stated that their final wish was not being fucking buried alive. Please, God, baby Jesus, listen to me when I say do not let me go into that box breathing. George Washington, our almost zombie president, wanted everyone to wait a minimum of 3 days before doing anything to him. Composer Frédéric Chopin requested that his heart be cut out entirely. Hans Christian Andersen and Alfred Nobel needed their arteries sliced and bodies drained dry just to be sure. And if they weren't dead before, they damn sure will be now. Imagine the headlines. Hans Christian Andersen murdered to death. That spooky bitch Edgar Allan Poe wrote several short stories about the ever-present possibility of being buried alive. The premature burial is about a person with taphophobia just fucking going through it. The Fall of the House of Usher, The Cask of Amontillado, and The Black Cat all share similar themes of alive burials. The amount of urban legends and misconstrued information around premature burials sent a bunch of folks straight into a tizzy. Stories circulated of someone slipping into a coma only to wake up years later and die a horrible claustrophobic death. Compounded phobias. Others claimed to have opened up coffins to find corpses with long beards and long hair, or with outstretched hands grasping the lid. And someone in Hollywood decided it would be a great idea to put Ryan Reynolds in a box for 2.5 hours and call it art. Fuck me. Butter my butt and call me a fucking blueberry. The movie Buried has a 7 out of 10 rating on IMDb and a shocking 87% on Rotten Tomatoes. Tip of the hat. I am so sorry for being a gulper of the haterade. But like, some of these stories aren't unfounded, right? Say hello to Anne Hill Carter, wife of Henry Lee II. In 1804, Anne fell ill and apparently died. A passing sexton heard noises coming from the burial vault where her coffin was placed and rescued her from her not final resting place. Alice Blunden, all the way back in the 17th century England, was knocked clean out by a cup of poppy tea, and the doctor declared her to be pining for the fjords after holding a mirror up to her mouth to see if she was breathing. tea made from dried unwashed poppy seeds would have contained morphine and codeine, and both sound like a great night, like great sedatives. Her family quickly made funeral arrangements, and 2 days after her burial, children scampering near her grave heard noises. Family and neighbors came to help exhume her, only to discover that she was truly almost dead and inexplicably returned to the grave with a guard watching over her. She's not a movie and fucking blockbuster that needs to be returned before 24 hours. You could at least wait a little before chucking her back in. The next morning, she was officially declared dead, only after attempting to free herself once more. So what's the most natural reaction to all of this hullabaloo? I'm so glad you asked. We build coffins with bells and blow smoke up each other's asses. That reads like an insult a MAGA supporter would come up with to shame the liberals. They're going around and putting TVs in caskets and using those hookah tubes to huff each other's butts, and they want universal health care? Not on my watch, not in my country. If the shambling almost corpse of Mitch McConnell is any proof, we'll do anything to try to stay alive. I was going to call McConnell the congressional version of the Pale Man, the, eye hand monster from Pan's Labyrinth, but I believe that's actually an insult to the Pale Man. Safety coffins were the tickle me Elmo of the 19th century, in the way that they were ridiculously overpriced for what exactly they did, and that was basically nothing. Patent number 81,437 was granted to Franz Vester on August 25th, 1868, for his improved burial case. The tomb was equipped with an air inlet, a ladder, and a bell that could be rung upon the undecidedly not decedent's awakening and alert the groundskeeper of their grave mistake. Patent number 329,495, issued November 3rd, 1885, to Charles Sealer and Frederick Borntrager for their burial casket. Any sort of body motion would trigger a clockwork-driven fan that brings down fresh, breathable air and also contains a battery-powered alarm. This alarm is just an open-ended wire that once skin makes contact, completes the open circuit and the alarm blares. Imagine someone standing by your air tube and they riff just a hot beefer and you trigger the fan, sucking fart air right into your enclosed space. And then as you're struggling, you get electrocuted because there's a fucking open circuit just sitting there. And to top it all off, in a Looney Tunes style ending, a spring-loaded rod will raise up majestically from the ground, releasing feathers or a flag, which may or may not have the words "bang" painted on it. For an additional markup, you could have a tube placed over the general area of your unremarkably dead face, so a small lamp could be lowered down the tube and someone can peek down and give you a little winky from the top side. I just hope the cardboard box I inevitably get shoved into has fewer grease stains than what I'm imagining. Someone came up with the brilliant idea to tie a string to the deceased's head, hands, and feet and have it attached to a bell above ground. If the bell rang, the cemetery watchman would shove a tube down into the coffin and start puffing air using a set of bellows. However, due to the natural process of bodily decay, a swollen corpse could accidentally trigger the bell to ring with shifting gases and changes in physical structures. Not only do you have to contend against the countless Igors that are scurrying around your cemetery looking for someone named Abby Normal each night, cemetery watchmen now get to stare in horror as Smitty Werbenjagerman Jensen's bell dingles and jingles after 5 years after his passing. And of course you have to save him. He was number one. And weirdly, not all premature burials can be considered unintentional. In medieval Italy, unrepentant murderers would be buried alive, head down with their feet in the air, a practice so common it was mentioned in Dante's Inferno. 16th century Habsburg Netherlands, inbred chins and all, a live burial was a common punishment for women found guilty of heresy, which for them probably meant that she put her hair up in a ponytail or breathed too loudly on a Tuesday. Feudal Russia in the 17th century, the live burial method was called the pit, and it was reserved for women who killed their husbands. Later on, they adapted it to be beheadings. I call that progress, Progress. Escape artist Bill Shirk in 1992 was buried alive under 7 tons of mixed dirt and cement in a plexiglass coffin. In a "oh, no way" moment, the coffin collapsed and almost actually killed him. There are different hobbies you can find, Bill. In 2010, a man from Russia wanted to overcome his fear of death by being buried alive. He was subsequently crushed to death. And because humanity needs one more to add to its cesspool, incredibly awfully problematic YouTuber and moldy food distributor Mr. Beast was buried alive for 50 hours in 2021 and then again in 2023 for a whole week. The one time I would wish for safety protocols to fail. Now, I wasn't totally blowing smoke up your asses about blowing smoke up our asses. Along with safety coffins that definitely totally worked and are still available for purchase, there were a few in the medical community that found, let's call them, particular methods that seemed more masochistic than helpful with determining death. 1745 saw Richard Mead performing the world's first smoke enema to resuscitate his victim patient. Tobacco smoke was thought to provide 2 essential elements that were lacking in unresponsive victims of drowning: warmth and breathing stimulation. Smoke enema kits were the 19th century version of AED boxes. They were scattered near waterways to aid in a potential drowning. A helpful rhyme was created in 1774, and boy, if this little sumbitch isn't catchy as fuck. Tobacco gleister, breathe and bleed, keep warm and rub until you succeed, and spare no pains for what you do, may one day be repaid to you. That is almost as catchy as the rebranding emergency services jingle that they did on IT Crowd with the new emergency services number.
Well, that's easy to remember. 0118 999 88199 9119 7253.
Imagine those weird Frida baby nose booger suckers that are all the rage with new parents and just sort of angle it downwards for max effectiveness. The next one sounds like something I did at sleepovers in middle school, and the fact that it actually gained traction, again, has me so concerned about how we as a society made it this far. Knocked out? Why not give that tongue of yours a good yank and a coating in vinegar? Tongue cranking was hypothesized and put into rigorous testing by Dr. J.V. Laborde, seeing that physical manipulation of sensitive body parts may lead to the ultimate revival of those not quite dead yet. Dr. Laborde had personal experience with the effectiveness of this technique and probably a restraining order that made him stay minimum 150 feet away from his victim for the rest of time. A woman was thought to be dead, and Laborde rhythmically yanked her tongue with a pair of forceps for 3 goddamn agonizingly long hours. The woman made a full recovery, complaining profusely of the pain the continuous yanking on her tongue had caused. Not one to be stopped while he was ahead, Dr. Laborde engineered a tongue-pulling machine specifically for use in mortuaries. And for extra couple of dollars slid underneath the table, that machine could be made available for rent for stag do's and frat hazing parties. For a more DIY approach, one could practice the fine art of corpse mutilation. Grab a sharp knife and start a whacking at Peepum's nasty little fingers and toes. I believe if you did that nowadays, you'd find yourself behind bars for at least a few years. I'd Google the exact sentencing length, but I'm actually afraid for the poor IT intern that's assigned to my work computer, because he probably already gets enough pings and alerts on I'm gonna be fucking for real, an hourly basis. My personal favorite out of all these techniques I found is the most straightforward point of action out there. Sticking a corpse's finger in your ear to hear a pulse. Let's be so fucking for real right now, besties. We didn't know jack about dick back then. And to be frank, we're not that far removed from today's methods than we are from electrocuting the eyelids of a dead body to see them twitch, which, yes, was a real method called galvanism, and yes, it did get the gears churning in a certain Mary Shelley's brain to come up with her literary creature of nightmares, Frankenstein. And you all can put down the fucking pitchforks, lit nerds. I know he's called Frankenstein's monster. And before you even start with me, I know he was a vegetarian. I watched Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller's groundbreaking, revolutionizing performance. I fucking get it. One of my favorite stories from working at Heritage Hill and learning about the absolute girl bosses that helped form Green Bay is of Mary Auntie Cotton. She was a Civil War nurse and spent a lot of her adult life tending to those who needed help the most, making house calls at every hour of the day and night. Her house, Cotton House, was originally located next to the conveniently placed Woodlawn Cemetery in Alloway, and occasionally she would need to traverse through the cemetery to get to her patient's home or back to hers. As the story goes, it was a cloudy and overcast night, and Auntie Cotton was on her path through the cemetery on her way home when she fell into an open grave, freshly dug for an interment in a few days. And because she was a little too far away for yelling and she didn't have any cell service, Auntie Cotton contemplated her life choices that brought her to this exact moment in time. Not a woman to be thwarted by a hole little more than 3 feet taller than she was, she began scraping at the sides to create piles of dirt to act as makeshift steps. A few hours later, and I'm guessing her fair share of colorful words, Mary Cotton made her way back to the surface and found that it was nearly dawn as she entered her home. Her family, frantic that she wasn't home on time, but also not bright enough to go out looking for her, fawned over her arrival and her overall safety. From that day on, Mary Cotton was said to carry 2 bricks of cake yeast in each of her pockets because, as she said, should she ever find herself in a grave again, just like good bread dough, I shall rise by morning. At one of the first cemetery walks I ever performed in, I was portraying Charlotte Bainan, a World War I nurse who was the first to die of the Spanish influenza in Green Bay. I asked Charlotte for a sign that I was doing her and her legacy justice, like a cardinal on a nearby grave or a stray sunbeam, angelic shit. I was all dolled up in my nursing outfit, and I welcomed the audience to the gravesite and began my spiel. One soul sat at an angle, and all the blood that should have gone up to their brain didn't, and they passed out. We ended up calling 911 and had some very well-to-do looking firemen show up as our first responders. They helped load the guest up into the ambulance, and they stuck around for a moment to get a few bits of information to pass along to the emergency department. Me being me, I sashayed over and went, "Hey, how many times do you get to take living people out of a place like this?" Everybody laughed, and yes, I did, in fact, find $5 on the ground, too. I did get my picture taken with a few of them, so there is a high chance I'm on a corkboard with the pin straight through my forehead at a local fire station. At the end of the walk, I had a quiet conversation with Charlotte that went along the lines of, next time, make the sign a little less adrenaline-filled, will you? A bird or a fucking butterfly will be sufficient. At this point in my life, I feel like I should maybe have some sort of plan in writing on what I'd like done once I depart this mortal coil. And I've been thinking maybe a reverse Viking funeral would be kind of cool. Instead of lighting my body on fire in the lake, you fling my body at the fire instead. And to up the ante, we use the scoring method from Cornhole. First mourner to 21 points gets my stuff. Thank you ever so much for sticking around for this episode of Paranormal Potpourri. I truly, truly, truly appreciate it. A few housekeeping things. I have a merch store. It is already-here-investigates.printify, PRINTIFY, period. Me. I've got some stuff from my paranormal researching group, Already Here Investigates, and I've got some Paranormal Potpourri shirts and logos and all that fun stuff. Be very appreciative if you took a look at that. If you love this show and if you love me, I started a coffee account that is ko-fi.com coffee for simply $5. It can be a single donation. It could be a recurring one. You can help support the show, help me upgrade equipment, manage subscriptions. What else? Travel to locations, meet guests, do fun stuff. I opened up commissions on Ko-Fi for $20. You can tell me the topic you want to hear about, and I will put my majestic little spin on it. So if you would like to support Paranormal Potpourri, that is ko-fi.com/paranormal potpourri. Love and appreciate you for that. Other than that, I don't have much. Join the Facebook group, Paranormal Potpourri Podcast. I got Instagram. I got Twitter. That's not a thing anymore, but I have it, I think. But other than that, thank you. And I'll smell you later.